Hello, everyone. It is Laurie and Jennie of Astropath. Today, we are going to be talking about the big excitement of the solar eclipse coming on April 8th. So that's the topic. And I just want to introduce you to us. If you're new to our channel, my name's Laurie, and you can find me at lauriefarrington.com. Jennie is my cohort here, and she is of Hidden Path Astrology. Hiddenpathastrology.com is where you can find her. Before you go on, please subscribe to our channel. After you've listened to us, leave comments, leave questions, follow us, please share us with your friends. It would help us a lot. And by the way, there's a lot of new subscribers here. So thank you if you're one of them, or if you've been following us for a long time. Thanks for being here. It means a lot to us. Our numbers are really rising right now, and that is thanks to all of you. So with that being said, is there anything that you want to share that you've got going on currently, Jennie, that you want people to know about?
No, nope. I'm working on some creative projects, and we'll have more outward public workshop type things down the road, but not quite there yet. So keep an eye out for a future schedule. But that's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, both of us do weekly blogs. You can sign up on our websites. I've got some online classes that I'm planning for over the next few months that are sort of not coinciding, but leading up to the publication of my book, which doesn't come for quite a while now, the 1st of January 2025. But I've got these classes that are going to kind of be working through the book in a class type setting. So keep an eye out for that. The best way to follow my stuff, the best way to follow all my stuff is to join me on Patreon, which is $5 a month, and you'll get everything that I do pretty much. So there's that, and you can find the links to all of our stuff below. And now that I've blathered on, we're ready to start talking about the eclipse.
That's right. So we have this big to do. This Aries solar eclipse is coming up on April 8th. The new moon itself is at 2:20 p.m. Eastern time. The official time for the eclipse is about 3 minutes before that at 2:17 p.m. Eastern time. So adjust for your time zone. Make sure you look and see if you're on the path of totality. It's in the United States. So, do the research, and if you're nearby, check it out because it's going to be amazing. Of course, I'm living in the cloudy Northeast, so we'll see what on earth happens that day, but I'm hopeful that we'll get to see something really cool happen that day. So that's kind of in a nutshell. I want to mention that eclipses always come in pairs. So this is the second eclipse of the pair. We had a lunar eclipse on March 25th, which Laurie and I also made a video about. So check that out. So we'll touch on that a little bit about how the pairs work together. And then other than that, since this is a solar eclipse, it means it's a new moon. So we have the full moon on April 23rd. It's just a regular old full moon. It's in Scorpio, which is interesting because that means it is also going to be a Mars-ruled lunation. So that is super important, and it'll be interesting to look at that. And then if you use the bigger cycles, we have in 6 months or so, we have a full moon in Aries on October 17th, and that is actually going to be at 24 degrees of Aries. So just to kind of put that out there, I guess we should talk a tiny bit about the cycle, right, Laurie? Kind of, the
Sure.
usual. Yeah. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Well, we could. You mean just the lunar cycle itself?
Yeah, just real
Yeah,
quick.
the lunar cycle, for those of you who might be new to thinking about these things, we really think of each month we have a new moon, which is in the same sign that the sun is moving through, because that's what the new moon is when the sun and the moon come together. And we think about those as times of beginnings. New moons are always a time of beginning. They're also a time of ending, because you can't begin something without ending something. So the cycle happens when we start at the new moon. A week after that, the moon has pulled away from the sun enough to be halfway illuminated. So that is the first quarter square. We can think of that as a time when that growing seed really makes a movement forward, leading to a week after that, the full illumination of the full moon. So, the full moon always is a time of full expression, a time of celebration. A week following that, the moon is moving closer, and we get again a half illuminated moon, which is the last quarter moon. That is a time of beginning the release that then moves into the next new moon. So, really these cycles, the lunar cycles it's the cycle of everything in life. It's birth, it's growth, it's illumination, it's falling apart, it's death, it's rebirth. Every single thing, whether it's the car in your driveway or the new pair of shoes you bought, everything goes through those cycles. It's new and then it's not new and it starts over again. So, all things go through those cycles, and these are really important to follow. But the eclipses are kind of wild cards within those cycles, because the eclipses happen when the sun, the moon, and the earth all line up perfectly. So at the solar eclipse, the moon is in between the sun and the earth. At the lunar eclipse, the earth is in between the sun and the moon. Did I say that right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So that's what the eclipse is. And they really do signify a time it's like a wild card in the annual cycle. We get, generally speaking, 2 pairs of eclipses each year.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the other thing, like just to talk about eclipses in general, it's about a 19-year cycle. So about 19 years ago, we also had a solar eclipse in Aries, which we'll touch on in a moment here. But basically the conditions that need to be satisfied for an eclipse is, and let's just use just the solar eclipse. The sun has to be conjunct the moon, so they're in the same place. They also have to have the same declination, so that means they also have to be parallel. And then the other condition that has to be met is that they need to be near the lunar nodes. The lunar nodes are simply the point that describe the moon's pathway, where the moon itself intersects with the ecliptic. The ecliptic is the belt that the Earth is spinning around the sun on. So when the moon kind of connects with that ecliptic belt, that's when the nodal axis happens. When it's going down, it's the south node, and when it's going up, it's the north node. So that's kind of just what that is astronomically. So, I mean, eclipses aren't that rare because they happen in these 2 pairs twice a year. So in other words, 4 eclipses per year. But it depends where you are on the Earth, whether or not you can see it. There's only one part that you're going to be able to see totality of a solar eclipse, and that's what makes it really exciting, is what makes it so unusual. The other thing is that a total eclipse can only happen when the moon is close enough to the Earth to actually block the sun. There's a pretty big discrepancy in how close the moon is to the Earth. It's about 30,000 miles or something like that. So when it's close to the Earth, it can actually block the sun, and that is the case with this eclipse. That it is definitely going to be able to block it out completely and be a total eclipse. So it's pretty exciting, to be, at least for me, living near it, for Laurie too. But that's kind of just a real quick primer about eclipses themselves.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to throw in here is just I read somewhere or heard somewhere that like 32 million people are within close enough to see it at this eclipse. I think in this country, 32 million. And what I want to say about that is, if you are close enough to get to 100% totality, don't be satisfied being at 99.8%, because there really is a huge difference. And I don't think I understood that until quite recently. If you're at you know, if you look it up, you can find the information online. If you look it up and discover that you're at 98.9% totality, you're still going to have to maintain those glasses on your eyes to not burn out your retina. You're not going to get the full experience. If you're in 100% totality, and prepare for major traffic jams to get there, because a lot of people are traveling for this because it is such a powerful moment. But if you can get to 100% totality, the experience is, it's really a full body experience, because the sun completely gets obscured, the stars come out, the birds stop singing, the everything really does go dark, and it can last, depending on where you are, it can last, I think, between 3 minutes, and if you're in certain places in Texas, up to 7 minutes. I think that's right. So, you can take your glasses off, and it's just like nighttime.
Hmm.
That's a profound thing for our bodies to experience. You said something about that, Jenny.
Well, what's true is that, first of all, you can measure scientifically the impact on the Earth's electromagnetic field when there's an eclipse. It has a tangible, measurable effect. That also goes for us. We are all, these biomagnetic fields that we have that are part of our bodies, where these electromagnetic waves, and that is actually impacted. There's an immeasurable effect on our physical bodies. And if you think about it, it's like you think about the middle of the night happening in the middle of the day, and just what that really means. When you take on what that means, you start to understand why in astrology we consider these to be such major pivot points. And that is essentially what we're talking about here. But Lori, you wanted to mention too that 19 years ago,
Yeah,
right, we had an eclipse. Do you want to don't you
yeah.
have a chart for that or something?
Yes, I do. Hang on,
Yeah,
let's show that, because it's so wild how these things can work. So
yeah.
what I'm showing you here is the eclipse, this current eclipse. And you can see the sun, moon at exactly 19 degrees. And we'll go over this more thoroughly in a minute. But what I want to show you right now is the comparison to the chart of the eclipse that happened on April 8th, 2005. Look at this. This was the same day of the year, April 8th, 2005. The sun and the moon were eclipsed at 19 degrees Aries. 19 degrees Aries. This is just, to me, this is a very wild thing to see. This was the last time there was an eclipse, a a north node eclipse in Aries, was in 2005. So I want you, all of you that are listening to this, to really think about what was going on in your life from that period of time, 2005 in April. What began at that time that really changed the course of your life? Because this, especially, if you are someone who has planets somewhere in that realm, those late teen, early 20s of any of the cardinal signs, really. So that would be Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, any of the cardinal signs. If you've got planets, I'd say between, I don't know, maybe 15 and 22 degrees of those cardinal signs, something like that, give or take. Pay attention to really how it impacts you, and pay attention to what was the reality of your life in 2005.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. It's so important to think about these in terms of cycles, because again, that's the whole point. That's the whole point of talking about lunar cycles, and then seeing the cycles in your life, and how they unfold. So it's very super important. Yeah. So I mean, I guess other things we want to talk about here. Well, this is a solar eclipse, so we're thinking about the sun being blocked out, for a moment in time. And so when you think about that daytime and all of a sudden there's nighttime in the middle of the day, what does that represent And psychologically, that represents this moment in time that allows us to see something emerging out of the unconscious, on a personal level. It's like really allowing something to pop up and to see, what exactly that is, and then that's what gives you the ability to then say, well, I need to make a pivot here. I have this new information about myself that's coming up and I need to make a change. And so this is a moment where you actively, consciously look at what's going on and you make a decision about where you want things to go, about where you want your life to pivot.
As you're
Yeah.
saying that, I'm thinking, think back to that period in 2005. How did you experience just what Jenny's saying? How did something come out of, come up for you that you were able to see in a different way? And how did you manage that? As you were talking, for some reason, I just had this flash. I know exactly what was going on in my life at that period of time. And I know exactly how I managed it then. And that can inform me very clearly of how I don't want to respond to it this time. I
Yeah.
mean, we can really, really gain information about the path of our lives when we start really thinking about these things. And we can make different choices, or we can see, oh man, I made a great choice. I made a great decision of how to work with that back in 2005. I'm going to kind of replicate that on this different level that I'm at now. Or we can look at that and say, oh my God, I made the wrong choice and I am going to commit to doing it differently this time.
Yeah. Yeah, and what you want to really think about is because it's the sun, it's a solar principle. So what you're really trying to do is be fully present to what emerges. So there's this key word or this key idea of being present to what is, and allowing yourself to accept it, to turn and face it. There's a lot of stuff about Aries in here, which we're also going to talk about. But it really is this like something emerging out of your unconsciousness that lets you know something you need or something that you want, and really working with that material. I mean, that in a nutshell is what we're looking at. So the other thing I want to mention is that there's also different. This is a north node solar eclipse. So that means, and when we pop the chart up, we'll circle it, but that means that the sun is conjunct the north node. So what that implies, the north node is a reach towards something new, a movement towards a new discovery, a change to, a forward movement based on what is arising from whatever you learn from the solar piece of it. So it really is this pivot into this new direction is what it is symbolizing. So. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, are we ready to open the chart?
Um, well, let's talk about Aries.
Oh,
You,
okay, sure, yeah.
just that little detail that it happens to be an Aries. What does that mean anyway? What do you
Aries,
think, Lori? What's
Aries.
Aries all about? Do tell.
What is Aries all about? Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. It is I think of Aries as it's the birth of fire. It's the cardinal fire sign. It's that impetus to begin. It's that spark, that ignition. Aries is an incredibly dynamic, passionate, hot sign.
Mm-hmm.
Um, all of the signs have a positive manifestation and a more challenging manifestation. And, I always say, people who listen to me probably have heard me say these things many times, when you're in a dark alley and you hear footsteps coming up behind you, you want Aries energy. You want to be able to grab that energy because that is the energy of taking action without without ruminating on why or how or who, just like action now. And,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of action in certain circumstances, like if you're in a dark alley and you hear footsteps behind you, is what you want. It can be problematic when you go to that kind of energy, when you're, sitting in a living room and someone says something to you and you suddenly go into that energy. That can be a little problematic. But it's a very dynamic, strong energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Aries is kind of like the fuse being lit. That's the catalyst for, all kinds of a cascade of events, and it's definitely, like you said, Aries is a amazing thing in an emergency. It is that crisis ability to be like, oh my God, this is happening and action happens now. This is what needs to happen now. And I mean, certainly all the fire signs have that ability to handle kind of emergency stuff. And I've seen that pattern a lot with people, but Aries is the instantaneous ability to manage that crisis right away, to take the action right away. And I think, on the dark side, it's incredibly destructive. I mean, if you don't channel fire efficiently, you end up with a wildfire and it blows everything apart and it burns it to the ground. I mean, there is no, and Aries, like no other sign, can burn bridges. So that's and so the key here is about how you channel that energy, and that's certainly what this eclipse helps us see. On a much more positive front, it's like Aries is just how you take decisive action. I mean, I think Laurie, you've already said it, but the movement forwards, the understanding of the spark that you want to move into a new direction. It also ties in to some degree with your identity, your most fundamental core spark of who you are. So there's kind of an identity piece with Aries, and I think that also comes into play into this eclipse too. Is questioning that, looking at yourself, your use of energy, your use of will. The problems of Aries, I think, come about more in our culture because we overvalue this energy. We overvalue the ability to take action right now with no regard for consequences. And it's not balanced in our society. And that's the problem. It's not the actual sign itself or the Aries energy itself. I mean, Aries energy by itself is incredible. It's amazing, all the things we've said. But the struggle we're having right now is a lot based on our total misuse and misunderstanding of this force and overvaluing it and allowing it to not have any kind of roots or any sort of counterbalance or a time to sort of soften and consider what else is going on, other people's feelings and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, Aries is
yeah.
ruled by Mars. So, you think about all the Mars things that come up, the archetypes around Aries. I think of, the warrior, the pioneer. If you are going to go in a new direction that no one's gone before, you need that Aries energy. If you're going to war, you need that Aries energy. The problem is you might run off and be a pioneer without, packing your bags properly, or you might start a war where none was needed. Those are the things. Yeah. Aries is it's an interesting energy. And I think one of the things that we haven't mentioned about Aries is it's a very youthful energy. Really holds the other way that I like to think about Aries is it's the screaming infant, and it's not going to stop screaming until it gets its needs fulfilled. There can be, on the negative side, a very selfish side to Aries. Like, I mean, that screaming infant isn't thinking about your feelings, isn't thinking about whether you're getting a good night's sleep. It's not important. Aries can be quite self-absorbed.
Yeah, and I think, we always like to talk about these things on a spectrum, but on a simple level, Aries is about knowing what you want, or and then going out and getting it. And that might sound like a simple statement, oh, knowing what I want and going and getting it. But I think we've probably, many of us watching this have certainly had that experience where you're not quite sure, you don't really know, and it takes a longer, deeper process to really truly understand what it is that we really truly deeply want, and then going out and getting it also has its, there's a lot of layers to that too. And certainly this solar north node eclipse in Aries, very tightly conjunct Chiron, which is what we'll talk about next, really has a lot to say about that process of getting to know oneself, getting to understand what one really wants, and then how to act on it in a way that is graceful and considerate, and progressive instead of regressive and resentful and angry, so those are some of the topics. I know more of this conversation is going to unfold when we start talking about the chart, so
yeah. Okay, you want to open that chart? Is it time?
do it.
All right, let's take a look at, I hope I've got the right thing up here. Here we go. Okay.
Oh, looks fab.
So here is the Aries Solar Eclipse chart for April 8th, 2024 at
Holy
2:21
Aries.
Eastern
Holy
Time.
Aries.
Holy Aries. Yes, that is a lot, an awfully lot of Aries energy. Look at that. Oh my gosh.
Boom. So first thing to
Boom.
notice is, of course, the sun and the moon together, 19 degrees of Aries. If you look
Ah,
to the little symbol, um, to oh, what I was going to mention next is that it's right next to the north node. It's at the 15 degrees north node. That's how you know it's a north node solar eclipse. And then the other crazy thing is it is so tightly conjunct Chiron.
it's exact. You know, it's crazy. It's like the sun and the moon are 1924. Chiron is 1924. It's really quite amazing. We cannot ignore Chiron's connection to this eclipse, which is interesting. You know, people who have worked with me over time know that I don't very often use the asteroids at all. In my work with clients, sometimes I bring in Chiron. I don't use any of the other asteroids. I really think that it's easy to clutter up the chart with a lot of extra things. And oftentimes I think the asteroids, even though I'm not saying they're not important, but there's so much information in a chart that I think adding too many extra things can be problematic for me and how I work. However, at this solar eclipse, there's no way that we would want to not put Chiron as a major player in this period of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I
So let's
mean,
talk about Chiron. What's
yeah, let's
Chiron?
talk about Chiron.
Yeah, let's talk about Chiron. We've talked about Aries. We've talked about the eclipse. Now, what's Chiron?
Yeah.
Chiron's the wounded healer. It is an area, you know, if you go back and read the mythology of it, I've got an article that I wrote a couple of months back about Chiron that's on my Patreon page. If anyone goes in there, they should be able to find that. And it's very interesting to think about the mythology of Chiron. Chiron was a teacher of all kinds of, healing modalities as well as military. You know, there was a military teaching as well for Chiron. And yeah, there's a lot involved in the mythology, but I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. What do you want to think about right now for Chiron, Jennie?
Well, let me just add to the mythology without going into the rabbit hole. But it's simply the idea that Chiron was responsible for training all of these the great heroes of mythology, like Achilles and these warriors that went out and Hercules. And the point is that he was responsible for imparting this much broader education. It wasn't just about here's how you kill. It was actually more like here's how you heal. Here's how you feed yourself. Here's how you take care of these other pieces. And so I think that Chiron's presence here in Aries is informing us, from that mythological point of view, is how to bring these other skills into the warrior energy of Aries, So I think that I'm glad you mentioned the mythology about that. On a psychological level, Chiron's presence here gives us an opportunity to reclaim Aries in a new way, to take it out of the zone of me, super selfish, and really incorporate, this idea of where do we need to move forwards on our planet and in our lives? Where do we need to galvanize energy to move in a new way that recognizes some of the other players that are here present in the astrology chart. Um, I think Chiron's presence here also brings this question about our vulnerabilities, our sense of inadequacy, a question about where do we overcompensate because we're afraid of looking like an idiot, we're afraid of looking weak, or we're afraid that we look like we don't know what we're doing. So Chiron really brings in that piece of the kind of the weakness that one has to face, and this idea, maybe even just this idea that somehow you're not acceptable. You're not an acceptable person. And, so therefore, like you don't have any idea how to act. You don't know how to act on your willpower because it's paralyzed, and it kind of brings in this willingness to look at the vulnerabilities associated here and the place where we may end up being destructive instead of constructive because we didn't realize we were acting out of fear and this sense of inadequacy instead of just taking a positive action. So those are some of the layers. I mean, what do you want to add in?
Well, there's so many thoughts going through my mind while you're talking about this, but you know, you think about Aries and all the warrior and all of that kind of energy, that masculine, and I'm not talking about man, I like man, but all of that um, toxic stuff that
Mm,
comes out of war and how much we are, if you think about the warrior, how much that energy can turn in on us and
mm,
wound us.
mm,
And then we have to go in and heal that. There's so much where we're wounded by this energy and we're vulnerable to this energy. And here we try to, put on this strong Aries front. I'm the big tough one and I can um, whatever, tackle this issue. And yet we're wounded by it if we're not really going in and looking at our own internal patterns, how those issues are wounding us. Chiron is all about um, where we need healing.
mm,
Chiron is also the unhealable wound. There is an element that um, where our deepest wounds are not cannot really be healed. They can be accepted, they can be worked with, they can be soothed, they can be managed in a way that we can find the rich soil underneath them. There can be great, like Chiron as the great teacher, underneath where we've been wounded is also where we can offer support and healing to others.
mm,
So
mm,
there's so much rich conversation in here. And with this eclipse happening right exactly conjunct that Chiron, there's so much for us as a species, as a humanity to look
mm,
at our own internal wound coming out of that anger place, that place where we hold so much anger and yeah, destruction of Aries. And to be able to look at that in our own charts, see where that is showing up, where we can work on really digging deeply and understanding where that Aries energy has has wounded us and where we can work on that and use it in a way to propel us forward.
mhm,
That Aries wants to propel us forward in a positive way, not to throw the next bomb, but to teach others how to work with that energy in a way that um, galvanizes us into a healthier future.
mhm. Yeah, there's certainly something here about the redefinition of courage. And
Yes.
the redefinition of courage is something about being willing to face the destruction that you've caused, the issues you've caused, the pain you've caused other people and yourself, and the things around you, the bravery it takes to face the things that we've done, and then to take that and to look at it, to incorporate it into the forward direction so that you're not pretending something never happened or pretending it doesn't exist or pretending that, oh, forget about that, I don't want to ever revisit that. It's no, it's facing it, it's accepting it, it's recognizing it. Every single person on this planet has this energy and has places that they can think of where there has been a misuse, of this energy. And really what we're trying to do is we are learning to relate to ourselves in a new way. We are learning to relate to our feelings of anger, our feelings of frustration, all of those hot feelings that we've experienced. We're learning to relate to those in a new way and to legitimize them, to say, you are real feelings, and to relate to them in a new way. And then from that place, be able to move into a new direction where those feelings are given a voice and are incorporated in a healthy way. Now, this is not to say I'm angry, I'm going to go act out on my anger right now. That's not the message. The message is identifying for yourself, where do I have anger, and sitting with it and seeing it and seeing what it has to tell you, and then using that to make a conscious, wholehearted decision about how you want to move forward in your life
Mm.
in a particular area. So it really is a redefinition of courage, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
I love that. Yes, it's a redefinition of courage. And I love what you said. I had to write it down. To facing the destruction that you have caused. We've
Mm,
all caused destruction around us,
mhm,
especially in the area that holds Aries in our charts. So
yeah.
the other thing that I just want to point out is that all of these Aries planets are ruled by Mars, and
Ooh.
Mars is over here in Pisces, conjunct Saturn.
Mhm,
That really, if you're thinking about this as a redefinition of courage and all of those planets and that incredibly powerful eclipse is having to answer to Mars in Pisces conjunct Saturn. This really, there's something in this that brings us into a much softer side of what's needed, and somehow bringing in divine wisdom with Pisces, taking action on stabilizing wisdom here.
mm. Yeah, and the Saturn piece, like right there, I mean, God, that is such a powerful message, because that really is saying, hey, Mars, you're in Pisces, so you need to work with the concepts of compassion, the ideas of empathy, the idea of recognizing other people's suffering, the idea of recognizing the sensitivities of people and other beings on the planet itself. And then Saturn is saying, and you need to hold yourself accountable for doing this. I mean, Saturn right there there's an accountability, there's an insistence on Mars doing this with a mature approach, not just doing it off the cuff, and whatever. I mean, it's really having to slow down, which Mars does not find easy. Slow down and ask, how you can really take responsibility for this, for yourself, for your individual process, that you're going to, redefine this courage for you, that you're going to not run away from your vulnerabilities and not run away from the suffering and vulnerabilities of other people, and to slow down and to allow that to be part of the story, a part of the shift, and we're also moving towards that Jupiter Uranus conjunction. So this is all part of this same story. And what does it mean to find the equilibrium that's being asked by the Taurus situation over there? So this is such a powerful section of time right now for everybody.
It really is. And there's is so much. I love that Mars conjunct Saturn, that the responsibility, taking the responsibility to use this incredibly powerful energy in a responsible way to move you forward, to allow you to really embrace the courage of being a little softer as
Yeah,
you take action. There's a lot about taking
yeah.
action here, but softening yeah, taking responsibility for some of the harsher ways you've done it in the past and finding better ways as you move forward. So
Yeah.
incredibly powerful time.
Yeah.
And
And I think,
yeah, we could
yeah,
go down many rabbit holes here in talking about the cultural stuff around it. We're not going to do that because that would bring us right into politics and so many things that would just cause everybody, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
The
we're
key
going to avoid
takeaway,
all of that.
yeah. And like just to summarize just very briefly, the key takeaway here is that the vulnerability we fear is an asset, not a liability. And that's the big takeaway.
Right.
So,
And that vulnerability will lead you to take the acceptance of that vulnerability and your own responsibility will allow you to really move forward in a very strong, powerful way. It's
okay.
beautiful. It's
All
really
right.
quite beautiful. So I think we're ready to move
Mhm.
into the individual impacts.
Indeed.
And I think we can keep these fairly simple and just move through them. Okay. So
Haha, that's what we always say.
we do always say that, don't we? Okay.
Yes.
So we're going to move forward and we're going to think about folks who have Aries rising. Now, if you have Aries rising, what does this mean for you? This is so personal about who you are and how you move through your life and through the world. People with Aries rising are pretty dynamic people. You know, you've got that Aries right on the surface, right on the horizon. It is who you show up as. So this is really a time where you're looking at how you have used all those things that we've described about Aries, how you've used the strength of that energy in your life, and how you have possibly been burned and wounded by your own strong energy, or how the culture or others have tried to control that strength. You know, if you think back to the lunar eclipse, because the lunar eclipse happened in your seventh house, you know, there may be a story here of how your strength and determination has been um, withheld or held down in some way. And that may be part of your own personal story of being wounded. So this is a time to really be vulnerable. Ask yourself questions about, you know, where you've misused that energy and where you can really step forward and take action with your personality, with who you are, to step forward as that strong, compassionate presence moving forward.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, and if it's helpful to you, think back to that time in 2005. It's 19 years ago, so it kind of depends how old you are and what's going on. But if that's helpful to you, because that just helps you see another time in your life when these same topics are highlighted. You were a much younger person, so you handled it differently, but that's also can be really instructive. Yeah, I mean, I think the other piece here, and I think Laurie's mostly covered, I mean, I think you pretty much covered it, but just really that idea of like tuning into your hot feelings, letting your hot feelings, when you feel angry or when you feel frustrated or when you feel really passionate, or anything else that fits in that category, just pay attention to those because those are really, they're signposts. They're giving you clues as to what, adjustments you need to make, what they're giving you clues about something that you really want in your life, and your job is to listen to what they're telling you and incorporate them into your picture here and incorporate them into what decisive actions you want to take. What change in direction do you really want to take? That's going to, as an Aries rising person, it's going to dramatically change your course, because I always think of, I think like to think about the rising sign as like where your ship is pointed. If your life is a big old boat, then the rising sign is the direction that boat's going in. And as an Aries rising person, you are very much about having to develop courage and having to develop the will to move through life that way. And the questions are going to be, but can you do it without burning yourself and other people? Can you find a way to do it with a bold courage that also allows for the softness and the kindness, and the understanding that needs to go along with it?
Yeah.
So,
And I think it's important. I just want to add one more thing. Um, Whether you can get into the path of totality or not, if you can, awesome. If you can't, take some time there. on the afternoon of April 8th, spend some time really with yourself, really allowing this awareness to come up.
Mhm.
Yeah, allowing your own strength to see your own strength and where that strength has been wounded, or where you've wounded others with it, and use that understanding to move yourself forward. It's a powerful, powerful time, especially with, having that as your rising sign. It's extremely powerful. So
Yeah. Okay.
move forward to folks with Taurus rising.
So those of you with Taurus rising, this Aries solar eclipse is happening such an interesting place behind the scenes. It's happening in your 12th house. The 12th house is hidden from view, it's tucked behind the scenes. So somebody with Taurus rising, it really just suggests a lifelong question, a lifelong struggle about who you really are and what you really want. Like when you really drill down and you dig deep to really take a look at what is beneath that. Because with Aries in the 12th house, there's some way in which your fundamental identity is kind of buried or merged a bit into the collective in some way that makes it hard to kind of tease it apart. I think the key word that comes to mind here with Taurus rising is unearth. You need to unearth your sense of self that is kind of hidden away. And this Aries solar eclipse provides you a great opportunity, an amazing opportunity to get to know yourself in a new way, to dig down into the unconsciousness, the deeper reaches of your being, and come to grips with what this energy really represents for you. That is just a super powerful thing to think about. If you're looking for clues, there's a couple ways to look for clues. One way to look for clues is to think back to 2005. 19 years ago, a similar configuration was happening. Chiron wasn't quite there in the same way, but anyway, think back to that time. That's one clue. A second clue is going to come from whatever happened at the lunar eclipse a couple weeks ago. So at that lunar eclipse, you had the chance to kind of witness what was coming out of your past, what unhealthy behaviors or habits that had to do with your health, your routines, those sorts of topics. What came to light from there? Because that's going to give you really good information about where you need to make a pivot or what kind of, well, not so much where, actually, what pivot you wish to make that has to do with unearthing these Aries components. So your courage, your bravery, your willingness to pioneer, your self-understanding, all of those kinds of topics are what you're looking to make a change on and carve out a new direction.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about that in the 12th house. It really is. It's like there's this incredible heat in you that needs to be unearthed, just like Jenny said. So you want to think about, what is in there? How has it been used in the past? How do you use that kind of hidden area of heat? And have you used it in a healthy way in the past? Or is it some level of resentment that you hold on to there? Where can you kind of go in and look at where there's some wound in there that is really directing your attention to a deep understanding. And that 12th house, it can involve your hidden unconscious patterns from, those inner unconscious patterns. It can also involve something around your spiritual awareness. There
Mm.
may be some heat in there that is kind of tucked away. I have all these ideas that I could come up with around storylines there, but I don't think that would necessarily be useful. But think about what that heat is in there and what
Mhm.
you need to do to accept your own internal struggles, understand your own internal struggles, and use that kind of hidden strength to move yourself forward.
Yeah, the other thing I want to mention, just because this is the 12th house and the lunar eclipse happened in the 6th house, is there is a need to really to unearth this heat and release it, because it can really wreak havoc on your health. So if you're having some health struggles, if you are having that right now, then this is a worthwhile line of thinking to pursue, because this can help you understand, because heat's got to go somewhere. And if it's not being released in a way that is really serving you, it can be destructive. And so it can really give you some clues as to what ways do you need to adjust, that's going to help your health. And this can be your physical health of the body. And with a Taurus rising person, I am thinking about the body, but also the 12th house does refer to mental health as well. So you want to think along those lines. And this is not by any means to put fear in you, but just simply to help you understand where to direct your attention to make a positive adjustment that can be incredibly helpful. So,
I'm really glad you brought up the health thing, because that is
yeah.
so important in this configuration. And yeah, if you are dealing with health issues or just issues in how you how you live, your lifestyle, and how that impacts your internal, your mental or emotional understanding and those internal patterns, there's something very important here for you to understand, unearth, and have the courage to look at. I mean, that's really, it's in the 12th house and it's Aries. It's like having the courage to look at where those internal pieces need a little gentle touch, and yet the determination to move forward onto a new path.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right.
So let's move now on to those who have Gemini rising. Now, if you've got Gemini rising, this Aries solar eclipse is happening in your 11th house. The 11th house it's really the area where we receive support from others. We can think of this as the community that supports us in the directions we want to go. So you want to think about what does this mean? Where do you use, where in your life is community held? Where are you on the precipice of a new understanding of how you use direct determination, where you need to move forward here? Is there an area here? If you've got Gemini rising, what's the story of how you've wounded others with your warrior nature? Um, and where you need to find a path to utilize that in a more courageous, direct, and yet more compassionate manner going forward.
Hmm.
You want to think about 2005. What was going on in terms of community for you at that time? What was a shift that maybe happened around that period of time? If this is relevant to you, if you're 20 years old or 25, this is probably not terribly relevant. You probably don't remember what was going on in 2005, although you might. If your family was part of a cult, well, there you have it. Uh, at any rate, you want to think about what community means to you right now and what you want different going forward, and thinking about how you've used that energy, how you want to use it going forward. Thinking also of the lunar eclipse a few weeks ago. What came out of that? What was the storyline that you started to really understand about how you give of yourself? How you kind of give yourself away and then possibly have resentment around not receiving
Hmm.
the greater community. It's an
Mhm.
interesting one.
Yeah, I think with Gemini rising, this is an opportunity to really redefine who you are in groups, who you are in the communities that you're part of. There's a big opportunity to just completely redefine that. And because Aries, one of the things about Aries is leadership. That could be one part of it. That might be that you are looking at a way in which you can offer leadership to your community. And of course, the two-way street of that is like, you can't be a leader without a community to lead. So you need the community that supports you. There it's basically you being willing to accept a role that your community may need of you, while they are supporting you. So it's very much a two-way street. But either way, there is something that you're going to have to overcome. There's something you're trying to overcome. There's a vulnerability here as well, that is, maybe it's, yeah, just not having the confidence to step into the role that you can see is opening. And part of you knows you can do it, but there's another part of you going, I don't know, and now is the time to face the I don't know, and let any other feelings that are coming up in there, if there's any frustration or, these hotter feelings coming up in there too, like now's the time to listen to those, and just ask them what they're trying to tell you. They're not here. If you don't do that, then they control the show. That's not what you want. You want to invite those parts of yourself, the hesitant part or the angry part, to come to the table so that you can understand exactly what pivot you wish to make here and how you want to step into a new definition of courage and how you show up in this community. Yeah, yeah,
It really is. It's a whole new way of moving forward in community for you, a whole new way. And
yeah.
whether you have in the past been too aggressive in community or been too scared to show your leadership, it's,
Mhm.
one of those stories is probably what it is for you. And you need to really go in there and work with that and understand it in order to move forward. Hmm,
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah. Okay.
That's lovely. Let's move on to folks with Cancer rising. Who do we know
It's
with Cancer rising?
no, nobody. Those of you with Cancer rising, this powerful eclipse is happening in your profession, or in the place where you show up the most in public, or your social reputation. I mean, those are all meanings of the 10th house. The 10th house is one of the most powerful houses. It's one of the top two powerful houses in the chart, because this really is your impact on the public, the way that you step up and you say, geez, I have a contribution to make here. How can I make that? So that's what the 10th house is about. This Aries solar eclipse really is giving you this opportunity to step into this truth in a new way, to face, your fears, to face your challenges, to face your struggles with vulnerability, and allow those to help, quite honestly, just help make you stronger, so that when you do step forwards and you say, I'm going to make the shift in this part of my life, it's going to be very public. It's going to have an impact on a lot of people. That choice is very well informed,
Mm,
by the reckoning of your vulnerability, and including that in the picture and bringing that voice to the table, in the pivot that you want to make here.
mm,
Um, some other things to think about. Way back in 2005, depending how old you are, there was a very similar configuration happening in the same place. So think back to that time. That can give you some clues as to where you're at now and what change you want to see now and what did happen at that time, and just see if you can kind of dig that up. Um, the other thing that you want to think about that's very much a part of this picture, because eclipses come in pairs, you want to think about the lunar eclipse that we had in 2 weeks. And again, watch that video if you didn't, to get clues about where that's impacting you. But in a nutshell, what you really want to look at is, where do you have some dependencies or some place that you give yourself away that has to do with your family? And maybe that has held you back from stepping forward into this, very public place where you want to have an impact. So the two really go together. So you really want to look at what came to light, what have you learned from that, what old habits and behaviors did you notice, from that time period, and then let that help you see the way you want to move forward. As you shed that kind of past piece, it's letting you see what's happening right now. What do you want to be present to? What do you really want, in your career? Like, what do you want to do? What kind of impact do you want to have? And all of that, is also going to be tied in with the other topics we talked about, the reckoning with compassion, the bringing in the thoughtfulness and the compassion of what's going on with other people, making sure that you're gonna be self-oriented in a positive way, but you're not being selfish, like where you're forgetting about everybody else. Um, some of the other things you want to think about are, your heated emotions, like when you feel angry, when you feel resentful, when you feel frustrated, those sorts of topics, when they come up, you really want to pay attention to those, because some of the things that you may need to understand is the ways that you've been possibly destructive or hurtful to other people, to do with your profession, or through parts of your life. And the goal here is not to beat yourself up and, oh my god, I've done these bad things. Not at all. It's for you to have a deeper self understanding, so that you know where you want to move forwards. Where exactly do you want to make this pivot? What change do you want to see, and how do you want to courageously step forward into a career path?
That's awesome. I think you covered that one very it's so interesting wherever Aries is. Yeah, you want to face this area with courage. You want to face your own understanding of who you are, who you've been in the public realm. That 10th house career, it can also be just your social reputation. Not everybody has a career or a job that they go to. Some people, this is very much about their social reputation, how they're seen in the world. And with Aries there, you want to get really clear. How have you used Aries in this area of your life? Have you been wounded by your own inability to include others in this area? Or have you wounded others with your strength and determination, or are you wounded by others in that area, bringing that energy to you? So you really want to look at that, get clear on where your vulnerability lies, and get clear on what is the courage that it's going to take to move beyond that vulnerability and into the strength and determination to create the career or the social reputation that you really desire. And this
Yeah.
is, this is the time to do that.
Yeah, Laura, your talk of, what's the wounding, like who have you wounded here, who you've been wounded by. And I was just thinking about just the tremendous struggle with authority figures that can happen with Aries in the 10th house. And depending what personal stuff you have in your own natal chart, that will show up different ways. But there's certainly that desire to be like, nope, I want to be independent. I don't want a boss. I don't, I don't want to be told what to do here at all. And there might be some very fruitful information when you consider that link. There certainly is for me. So
Yeah. Yeah. This is, that's why you covered this so well. So yeah, 2005, really thinking about what the story was in 2005, how you made a pivot in 2005 around your career. That's an important consideration. Okay.
okay.
Cool. Anything else you want to say about that one?
Oh, volumes, but let's move.
Okay. If anyone has Cancer rising and wants to discuss this further with Jennie, contact her directly. All right. Now we're going to move on to folks who have, oh, what did I do? Is that
No,
right?
that's right. You got it. Leo.
Okay, Leo rising. So for those of you with Leo rising, this solar eclipse, this Aries solar eclipse, is happening in your ninth house. So this is, yeah, the ninth house is an interesting one. I think of it first and foremost, I think of your worldview, your bigger picture, your bigger understanding of the world that you live in. And the ninth house very much composes all the things in our lives that create that worldview. So that would be education, travel, cultural understandings, religion, even politics, all of those things that kind of come together and create our worldview. Well, if you've got Aries on that in that house, which you have if you have Leo rising, this would suggest that you've got really a lot of heat in this area. You're very your ideas of the worldview are a place where you just hold a lot of strong opinions, let's say. So this is a period of time where you really want to think about, what is the cost to you of maybe the misuse. I'm afraid I'm going a little negative here. But I'm thinking a lot about, how have you been wounded by your own understanding of your worldview? Where has your understanding of the greater world wounded you? Or, maybe some of these big world issues where they've wounded you, where you hold a lot of vulnerability in your worldview. Maybe you are really vulnerable in expressing that as well. So this is a time, at any rate, for you to figure out what the vulnerability is regarding your worldview, for you to think about how compassion needs to be added into the mix, instead of coming out of the gate with this rage around bigger world issues. You want to really work on developing the courage to be a little softer here, the courage to bring in compassion in order to make a pivot in kind of bringing in some leadership qualities that might encourage other people to come along with you as you shift and change your own worldview. um, you want to think about 2005. What was the story there? What was the pivot? What was the change in your bigger understanding of the world at that time? This could be a period of time where you come to an understanding that you need some more education, because your worldview just isn't where you want it to be. You need to bring in some other education. Maybe you need to travel. Maybe you need to really study other cultures to kind of get a more well-rounded understanding of the greater world. Thinking back to 2005 might help. Thinking back to the lunar eclipse a few weeks ago, bringing in some understanding of communication, how you communicate, how you talk to others about these big issues. There's some storyline in there for you if you have Leo rising.
Mm. Yeah, and I think it's funny having Aries in the ninth house there. I mean, there's definitely something about needing to understand your own opinion and how you kind of either throw that opinion around, or it's hard to imagine not sharing your opinion with this, but I suppose that could be true too. But there is something about, yeah, like the way that you work with your worldview, and like the way, like you really have the power to be a leader here. But it also, with Aries here, I know what you mean about the kind of going negative thing. Just the idea that you could be very selfish in the way, in the worldview here, and what you really want to do is like is question that. One example would be like, if you're somebody who travels a lot, something that you need to understand is that you have made a decision to get on an airplane over and over and over again, and that has an impact. There's a lot of fuel being used. You have a big ecological footprint. So not to beat you up for traveling, because it's great that you learn all these different things, but just simply understanding the cost, the investment that is going along with your decisions, and so you want to just have an understanding of that, and an understanding of how that plays into the whole picture here, because really you have such an ability to offer courageousness here and leadership here, and if you are someone that's traveled the world, then you've seen the way other people live. You've seen the suffering or the impacts on other countries in different places around the world, of whatever the story is in each of those places. You've seen that. You have a deep understanding of what that means. And so you really have the ability to express that. And as Laurie said, with whatever the reckoning with around the lunar eclipse about the way you communicate, you have an opportunity to use your voice in a new way. Whatever came up at that lunar eclipse is allowing you to release whatever way that you want to release about how you communicate. And now you can do it in a more leaderly way. The other thing the ninth house really refers to is your own critical thinking. Can you think critically about the issues of the world? Can you recognize the different sides and really, not just buy into someone's opinion over there, or, follow along with that other group of Aries over there who have a really sort of fiery opinion. This is, can you tease apart for yourself, make your own decisions without just sort of follow the leader? I mean, that's going to be an important question here, and a vulnerability with Aries. So that's the vulnerability you really want to tangle with and take a look at, and then reclaim it and recognize how powerful it is to face your vulnerability and to walk with it.
That I
Yeah.
love that you brought that up. Just the courage to make a shift. If you're somebody that's had this, particular worldview, this particular vision, and you've been very, hot about it, this can really be
Mm,
a time of having the courage to shift that opinion, to
yeah.
follow a new path. It's really
Yeah.
powerful.
That's a good point, Lori, because if you're really worked up about your opinion and whatever and this and that, it's really time at the solar eclipse to be like,
Well,
just take a step back and ask yourself, why are you so hot about it? And get to the core answer of it.
I think that's so important to think about for all of us, wherever
Yeah.
this is where have we been so hot and so opinionated? And now we have to have the courage to shift that, to change it, and to do it in a different way. That's
Yeah.
really beautiful. Okay, wonderful. Leo rising. Now let's move on to folks who have Virgo rising.
Alrighty, so those of you with Virgo rising, this is another one of those interesting ones. I mean, the earth signs here, all of the earth signs are dealing with this hot, fiery energy in some way where it's hidden behind the scenes, in a more tucked away, private, hidden part of the life and of the chart. And that's definitely true with Virgo rising. I mean, Virgo rising, all of this Aries energy is in the eighth house. And again, remember that the eighth house is that place where you bump into other people's stuff. I mean, on a simple level, that's essentially what it represents. And I think, having Aries here means that there may have been, there may be a tendency to kind of draw boundaries fiercely and quickly and, like, no, I don't want you in here. Get out. That would be, and sometimes that's appropriate, right? I mean, sometimes that is, if you're in a dangerous situation, unsafe situation, you absolutely need to draw a boundary like that. But there's a lot of nuance in relationship, right? There's going to be a lot of different levels. So the question that's being asked of you here during the solar eclipse is about that type of thing, is about those kind of boundaries, and is about the, reckoning with when you have that knee-jerk reaction to just be like, no, I'm done, to take a step back and ask yourself, what's the deeper issue here? Like, what's the core thing? Because when you're having a knee-jerk reaction, you're responding to the hotter emotions, or maybe even just some fear, which is also understandable to have some fear. So that's kind of where your attention is being drawn, is to those eighth house issues. The eighth house is also, I really like to think about rituals here and letting rituals support you, because rituals will let you see yourself in a new light. So a really good one for Aries in the eighth house is going to be burning something, like burning some smudge or burning something in your house in a way that kind of lets you just clear the area and allow you to encourage your inner heat to kind of settle down a little bit. Those are some of the things that come to mind for me with this Aries coming about in a new way. Um, I think you have anyone with Virgo rising has a tremendous ability to step into the more leadership pioneering aspect of Aries here and show us a new way of managing other people's difficult stuff, of, allowing people. I mean, oh God, I think about allowing other people to be angry, allowing other people to be a jerk,
Mm.
and say, okay, we all do that sometimes, you know, and then holding that space, not to let somebody wreak havoc or be, you know, awful and violent or whatever, but just to allow other people to express their anger and their hot feelings. I mean, that's really, there's a big leadership possibility for showing us a new way with that. Anyone with Virgo rising. Um, so some other clues to whatever this topic might be. One is 19 years ago, April 8th, 2005. Do you have a recollection of what was going on in your life that had to do with this eighth house, this place where you bump into other people's values and other people's, you know, intense emotions and other people's attachments to money? You know, is there something like that? Um, Another helpful clue is to think back to the lunar eclipse 2 weeks ago on March 25th. What came up from that lunar eclipse? Like, what did it show you some way that you tend to be dependent on, you know, some other idea or someone else because of some old values that you're ready to kick to the curb, you know, that you're ready to release and let go of. And if you did have something like that, letting that inform what new way do you want to do things? What different way in relationships do you want to be where you can use this wonderful courage and bright spirit of Aries in a positive way, to shine a light in some dark places? You know, like how what pivot do you want to make along those lines? But those are some of the things you really want to think about during this Aries solar eclipse.
I love this. As you're talking about, I'm thinking people with Virgo rising. Um, I, with Aries on that eighth house, what comes to my mind is, with Aries on that line, people can really be like my way or the highway.
Mm.
That's what I think of with this. It's like my way or the highway. How I navigate other people is they better do it my way. I'm talking about this from a very personal perspective. And Jennie, one of my big struggles has been over the years kind of approaching things like somebody will bring an idea and I'm like, no, my immediate response, I have this immediate, and this to me, this eclipse is so much about, okay, where has that Aries attitude, that determination and strength been used in a way that has not been helpful? How can you find a different way? Where has that attitude, that strong Aries attitude, created a block for you, a vulnerability where you say my way or the highway, and some people just actually go on the highway, and then they're gone. So, where have you been wounded? Where is this a vulnerability? How can you approach the navigation of other people's stuff with a little more understanding, a little more compassion, and yet maintain the determination and the leadership ability? Because you've got a lot to give and a lot to offer here, but you've got to be able to do it from a perspective that's not just that burst of my way or the highway.
Yeah, and you know, an important thing here, as you're talking, Lori, it's just reminding me a really important thing with the Aries in the eighth house is just like, you know, when you have that knee-jerk reaction to say no, you know, if you're a Virgo rising person, you know, you're really protecting your own vulnerability. And the worthwhile pursuit here is to really investigate what's in that vulnerability for you, you know, because we do those hot, you know, abrupt things like because we're protecting ourselves, and that's because the part you're protecting is isolated somehow or isn't part of your whole picture. You haven't taken it in, you haven't related to it. And so when you have those hot emotions that come in direct response to someone else pissing you off, you know, then it really is a sign, a clue, a guidepost for you to have a deeper understanding so you can relate to parts of yourself that have kind of been cut out or are floating out by themselves. And as you incorporate and integrate that, that's the Chiron meaning of integrating those pieces so that you can be a more whole person. And then you don't have to, you will find you get less triggered by people as you incorporate that learning about yourself, and you reclaim Aries, in the new way. And then you become much more able to be that leader without needing the volatility, but having the direct action and the admirable ability to take action, immediately and quickly, but without having to harm, and that is such a more powerful place for a leader to be than not. So
Yeah. Yeah, learning not to be triggered is definitely, I think, a big piece for people with Virgo rising. That, yeah, learning not to be easily triggered. And at this at this solar eclipse, it's just such a powerful time to really understand where that trigger comes from, why it's there, and find a new path forward. So.
yes.
Bottom line, there you have it. Now let's take a momentary break, Jenny.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's get back to where we were, Jenny. And we are now moving on to folks who have Libra rising. All right, so if you've got Libra rising, this eclipse, this incredibly powerful Aries solar eclipse, is happening right in your seventh house. This is one of the more powerful houses, as it is an angular house. And so we want to think about relationships. This is all about relationship. You want to really give some serious consideration here to how you've used Aries energy in your personal, intimate partnerships. Really the relationships that are involved here with the seventh house, we can think of as our marriage or romantic partners or business partnerships. In general, contractual relationships are very clearly here. I say romantic, but a love affair is a whole different thing. This is really, your core primary partnerships that are involved here. So, it's really a funny thing because people with Libra rising, they come into the world with this sort of sense of wanting to please others. And yet when it comes to the partnerships themselves, there's so much strength and determination in that area, and they're really attracted to dynamic partners and dynamic partnerships and strength in that area. So at this time with this eclipse, you're really looking at how you use that energy, how you use dynamic, hot, assertive energy in your partnerships. Have you overused that? Have you, used that in a negative way? There, with Chiron here, we're looking at, we really need to be taking responsibility for where we've wounded others in this area and where we have ourselves been wounded through our own possibly over aggressive stance in relationship. So, not to, I don't want anybody to feel like, oh my God, I'm an awful person because I've wounded people in relationship. Well, to one extent or another, we've all wounded people we've been in relationships with, correct? Okay. But this is something where you really want to be aware of where you have been wounded through your own assertiveness or your own expectations in partnerships. Looking at that and finding a new way, really courageously looking at your vulnerability in partnerships. Where are you really vulnerable in this area? And what is it that you need to really shift as you move forward in a new manner? Think back, 2005 could give you a good clue as to what some of the shift that is happening needs to be made. You know, obviously, it's not exactly the same as it was in 2005. You're not the same person that you were in 2005. But in 2005, there was probably a major shift in how you be in partnership. Think about that and think about how a similar story is playing out now and how some sort of shift is happening that is going to allow you to bring more of your own leadership abilities into your partnerships rather than kind of being scared of that and pulling back. You know, there can be a lot of that here as well. You also want to think about what the storyline was at the lunar eclipse a few weeks ago. What was it that you were really seeing clearly in yourself in terms of how you possibly give yourself away by trying to please everybody with your personality? There's some links here and some major growth potential in how you move forward in your partnerships.
Mhm. Yeah, it's really interesting, both with Aries rising and now Libra rising. I mean, these are just, gosh, just such fundamental places of your life. I mean, this is you and how you deal with the other. I mean, the self and other, that really very basic quandary. So those of you with Libra rising, I mean, this is a major identity shift. I mean, this
Mm.
is doing something really differently from how you've done it. And like you said, Lori, like it's possible that with the Libra rising, that there is an easier tendency to give oneself away, to kind of, to do things like demand, to want harmony no matter what the cost, to avoid conflict, to avoid, having to kind of assert oneself. There is the suggestions, and with the Libra lunar eclipse, which is a little bit of a tongue twister, but when that happened, as you mentioned a couple weeks ago, really, I wonder if those of you with the Libra rising really got an opportunity to see that little window inside yourself, like where you ask that question, where do I give myself away in some manner? Sometimes it's through pleasing people, but sometimes it's just avoiding people, period. Like you just don't want to deal with it. So this whole situation really is giving you a profound opportunity to do something really new and different, with how you recognize your own vulnerability. You allow it, you embrace it, you relate to it, and you let that be part of how you move forwards, from now on, into partnerships, because this really is a pivot into a new direction. It's also possible that, just thinking about, with Libra rising, we've been talking about paying attention to your hot emotions, like where you feel angry and where you feel frustrated or even passionate, and really tuning into that. But one thing that also could be possible is paying attention to an absence of anger, like looking at places where you damn well should be angry and you're not, and asking what's going on there. Because I think that, not that I'm trying to get people to be angry, but just the value of those emotions. And when you don't allow yourself to experience those hot emotions, it really turns into depression. It really turns into a dampening down of those, the hot spark energy gets damped down, and it really can have a massive impact. And so this is a really good time to, like, just evaluate that use of energy, evaluate the presence or absence of those intense feelings, and investigate that. Like, be curious and investigate and find out more so that you can really make this pivot from an informed and compassionate place. So that's what I was thinking about.
Yeah, I really like that you brought that up of
Mm,
the avoidance or the not facing your own internal anger. I think that's a
mhm,
really important um, way to think about this. I,
mm.
yeah, it really is. There's something very rich in all of that, for sure.
Yeah. And we
Yeah,
all
it
have
is.
to, yeah, sorry. I was just gonna say we all have to contend with the culture we live in too. And depending on whether you identify as male or female or whatever, like these questions can come about in different ways.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it is interesting because with that Aries on that seventh house, you may really struggle to feel anger in your relationship and just always pass it off and see it as the other person's anger
Mm-hmm.
and not acknowledge that this is something within you. You may think, oh, well, Chiron here in the seventh house is about me being wounded by their anger. Well, maybe your wounding is because you haven't faced your own, looked at your own and figured out how to, and probably if you're not looking at your anger, it's probably very much connected to the fear of what that would create, the fear of, oh my god, if I'm angry, then the whole world is going to burn up. There's that. But really understanding that we have to grapple with these things on very deep levels, and in order to really create the relationship, the partnership, the rich, healthy partnership that you want. Like you started out early on in our conversation today, talking about what you want. What do you want in a relationship? And in order to get to that, you have to understand not just your partner, but yourself. And this is the seventh house. It's about your partner. It's also about you in partnership.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
great.
So let's move on. I can see that I could talk about this one all day.
I know.
So let's move
Interesting
on to
topic.
folks who have Scorpio rising.
Okay, so those of you with Scorpio rising, let's see. This Aries solar eclipse is happening in your sixth house. So what this implies is that this is the time for a major pivot, to do with your routines, to do with the way that you structure your life. These are all the habits that you have, the way you take care of your body. So your exercise, like how you prepare your meals, what do you eat, how do you sleep, what's your routine before you wind down for sleep, how much screen time do you use, and then whether or not you're doing meditation practices and things like that. So that's the area of life where you are due for a pivot. You're due for some kind of overhaul. With Aries here in the sixth house, there is a clear need to manage heat, so you need to manage your hot emotions, so anger, frustration, passion, those things need to go somewhere. They need to be incorporated into your routines, or in somehow that you structure your lifestyle. There's a need to understand how absolutely important it is to let the heat be released. On a physical level, if you don't let the heat release, you get inflammation, inflammation of the physical body. Just to give you an example. So it's absolutely vitally important that this is something you're doing for your health. So with Scorpio rising, you need to just kind of check in, what's going on with you? What pivot do you want to make? What are the habits that you have that are healthy, that are supporting you? And then what are the habits you have that are not? And then what new things do you need to incorporate, to get yourself to a better place? um, this is a pivot. This is a time to change. If you're not quite sure, you're like, not quite sure where this is landing. If you can, think back 19 years ago, 2005, April 8th, the exact date. But anyway, around that time, do you recall some kind of pivot that happened with your health? Is there some new routine you started doing? Is there some new sport you did, or some habit change that you made? Like, think back to that. And then also, consider too, another set of clues lies in the lunar eclipse that happened 2 weeks ago on March 25th. So in that case, you want to think about maybe some unconscious patterns that became obvious to you, some kind of something that's hooking you into the past and keeping you there in a way that isn't really helping you. So, think about whatever came to light. It might have been something that came through a relationship or something like that. But allow that to be part of the picture here as you think about, what does it mean to reclaim Aries? What does it mean to be courageous, when it comes to your routines? What does it mean to face the vulnerabilities that you have here, and to allow yourself to see how those vulnerabilities can become strengths? So in other words, an example would be if you discover you have a dietary need, and you have to change your eating. Let's say you have to cut out dairy or something like that. Rather than being like, oh God, I can't eat dairy. This is terrible. Think about the new way that you can create a whole new plan for your eating just based on that one change, so just a simple example, but that's the kind of thinking that we're incorporating here. How can you turn your vulnerabilities and your challenges into things that are strengths, and then allow you to step into this determined, courageous leadership ability that Aries can have and can offer you?
Mm.
So those are some of the topics.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm thinking about, wherever Aries is, there is that leadership quality. There's also can be such a tendency to go it alone
Mm,
where Aries is.
mhm,
And, I was thinking you were talking a lot about health and lifestyle and all those things that make up our day-to-day life. And I was thinking also about so many. Let me think. How was I thinking about this? I was thinking about not just the health part of our lifestyle, but our work day. I feel like, there's some way in which how you set up your life, whether it be around your health care, your self-care, or your day-to-day routines in the way that you go about your job. Maybe you are someone who just feels like you have to do everything on your own. And this could
mm,
be a time of really realizing how much going it alone costs you.
mm,
And that there may be a way that you have to courageously allow someone in to help you. Maybe a health trainer or an assistant in your business that you can be the leader of, but not be going it alone. Really understanding that you can be a leader, you can take on the courage of leading another person rather than going it alone.
mm. I'm really glad you brought that into the conversation, because that's absolutely true. And it might be that you feel like you have to, like, if you're exercising, you might always think, oh, I'm always going to do this by myself. I'm going to go on my own bike ride or my own run or my own, or whatever it is that you're doing. And like, maybe it's just time to like not do that, but to go with a group of friends and like make it into something more fun, that you get to release heat in a way that isn't so serious and intense, but as a way for you to bring more levity to your life. And I think that's a really good point, because that is one of the misuses of Aries, the rugged individualism, like I got to do everything all by myself. And it's not, that's not the ultimate message. I mean, nothing really can be done in isolation anyway. So of course there's always that piece that's self-determination, but that doesn't mean you have to do it all by yourself. So that's a really good point, and a really good way to think about this one.
Yeah.
Um,
So if you're going to bring all your friends together to go on that bike ride, you can still be the leader. You can make the, you can
I can
reach
still
out.
kick their asses, but
Right, you can determine where you're going. But yeah, I think that's a good point. Um,
yeah, and just, remember to focus on what you do want. Because I think it'd be a tendency to be like, oh, I don't want all these things, to do with my routines. Well, just focus on what you do want. And that's what's going to guide you, to really reckon with that.
I
So,
think that's great. Okay, let's move on to folks who have Sagittarius rising. Now, if you've got Sagittarius rising, we're looking at this eclipse happening in your fifth house. The fifth house, such a great house. It's really about how we give of ourselves most directly, most unapologetically. We give of ourselves in this fifth house. This house, you can think of it as being related to children, to love affairs, to creativity, to having fun, all of those kind of things, which really, the fifth house is about how we give love. So with Aries there, if you've got Sagittarius rising, you tend to be pretty hot and direct. If you love something, if you want to be creative in some manner, you probably tend to just kind of take action in that direction and make it happen in some way. Obviously, there's both the positive and more challenging side to doing that. But at this point, you want to think about, first of all, what do you want? What do you want? Do you want a child? Do you want to become a creative person or a differently kind of creative person? Or do you know, what is it that you want in this area? What kind of fun are you looking for? You want to think about that. You want to think about how possibly your tendency in the past to be overly hot and overly reactive in this area has caused problems, or like we were talking about with the last one, maybe your tendency has been always to go it alone here. And you want to look at how the more challenging side of Aries, the more aggressive or selfish side of Aries has contributed to you having to kind of pay a cost here. Where is their vulnerability in your creativity or in your giving of yourself? What shift do you need to make at this point in time, and kind of bringing more compassion, bringing more understanding to your own ability to take action here? You clearly have a lot of ability to take action here, but you want to really work with developing an understanding of the cost that you've paid for misuse here and how that's kind of left you vulnerable, and what changes you want to make here in order to go forward. To kind of understand this a little more deeply, it might help, depending on how old you are, it might help to think back to 2005, which was the last time that this happened at the exact same place. So 2005, in the spring of 2005, we had this same setup. Chiron wasn't there, but the eclipse itself was right in the same spot. So how did your life pivot at that time in regards to how you give of yourself? Whether that be creativity, children, whatever. How did you shift um, what how did you shift your creativity at that time? Does that teach you something about what is needed now? Think back again to 2 weeks ago at the lunar eclipse, which occurred in your 11th house. What were you able to see at that lunar eclipse in how you receive support from others that might help you understand how now you need to, do a little pivot in how you give of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
in a nutshell?
Yeah, in a nutshell. Yeah, this one is interesting to me because I was just thinking about the juxtaposition as a Sagittarius rising person, and the juxtaposition of having Aries, arguably the most self-oriented sign in the whole zodiac, in this place where you're giving of yourself. And I can see some inherent contradictions here, or struggles with contradictions. Like, for example, that one might feel that you don't want to do your creative pursuit because it's too selfish. Because that's all just me navel gazing, and that's not real. I'm not doing anything for the world by creating my art piece by myself here in my studio. This idea that it's inherently selfish to do such a thing, and that you don't want to do it. You know, um, and I think that really what this whole axis, and you mentioned the Libra lunar eclipse, so bringing the 5th and the 11th into play here. I mean, this is all about how you give of yourself and the community that's there to receive you. So by definition, this is not, just this isolated, all by myself thing, doing all by myself, and I'm not giving of myself in any way. Like, by definition, it is a two-way street here, is what I'm getting at. And I just wonder if there's maybe a little bit of the possibility of either going totally over the top and, yes, being selfish and only doing what's good for you, and yay for me and screw everyone else. I mean, I could see that being one bad end of this. But I could also see a way that this would lead to a little bit of a self-negation, like, oh, I'm not going to do that thing because that's just too selfish. So I think I don't know what the situation is for each and every one of you who are listening to this, but do ask yourself, like, what's at the core? What are you afraid of with giving yourself? Are you afraid of giving too much? Are you afraid of not giving enough? But really kind of digging into what is that vulnerability about? and is there a struggle with, not really knowing what you're worth, and so why bother giving anyway? I mean, there's something in that about really having a better understanding about your own identity and how you want to be able to joyfully give of yourself in a way that isn't in a vacuum, that isn't just about your release of heat, but is about truly giving to others. I don't know. There's something, I don't know if what I'm saying is making sense, but there's something in that, like really grappling with that vulnerability there and what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. You might want to really ask yourself, especially if you're experiencing it in the way that Jenny's talking about as sort of, uh, yeah, self-negation. Like, yeah, I don't want to be creative because it's selfish. Where has your creativity been, um, been used against you in some way?
Mm,
Where have you been accused of being selfish when you follow your own
mm,
strong desires to give of yourself? You can just imagine that in a really simple way. You think of a little kid coming home from school with their little art piece, and their mother looks at it and says, "Well, you're not an artist, that's for sure." You know how we are so easily shamed when we try to put ourselves out there. And, this is a really important thing. If you've got Sagittarius rising and any of this resonates with you, like, oh, there's some place in me where I feel wounded by my ability, when I try to give of myself. If there's any of that, this is so important for you to go in and look at finding a new way of really engaging that determination. For you, it really is. It's finding a new path of determination of giving of yourself in a new way.
mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And just one other thought I want to add based on the first thing you said, which is the idea that you have to go it alone, is don't be afraid to ask for support. Don't be afraid to have the courage to ask for the support you need to support this very creative part of your life. So,
If you're that grown up who brought the little picture home and your parents shamed you, go sign up for an art class. Do something for yourself that really, like you said, yeah, you don't have to go it alone. Okay,
yeah.
so let's move now to folks who have Capricorn rising.
Okay, so those of you with Capricorn rising, this Aries solar eclipse is landing in your fourth house. And again, here we have that pattern of this very hot, fiery energy somehow being tucked away, hidden away a little bit. The fourth house is the most private house in the whole chart. It's the one at the very bottom. So really, it speaks to this very private internal portion of the chart. It also speaks to our family of origin, what we are raised in, what we grew up in. And then it speaks to what we are in now, our family situation now, and our home. Like, what is our home life like, and our physical house, and our connection to where our home is. So there's quite a few topics here, and so as you can see, I mean, this Aries solar eclipse and having Aries here really is getting right at what is your identity amongst your family? What is your identity at home? Those are some of the questions that this is bringing up. And right now with the eclipse, you have this just absolutely powerful moment to make this different, to take this in a new direction, to go to be a new, to access a new part of yourself, a new part of your energy in your definition of yourself through the family lens. So this is a pretty powerful opportunity because it's the very bottom of your chart. It's the foundation. It's the foundation of your personality. So this is something that, although it's slightly tucked away from view, can have an absolutely profound effect on everything else that you do. I mean, it's like, pouring a new foundation, essentially. And what you really want to be able to do here is, face the vulnerabilities that come with this. And those vulnerabilities come from our childhoods. They come from those subconscious patterns that got built as you were a child, what you absorbed, and the messages you received about what it means to have fire energy, what it means to be courageous. If you were born as a female, like it's very likely that you ingested lots of information about having hot feelings not acceptable. I am not allowed to be angry. I am not allowed to be upset about anything. I need to be a really nice little girl. So those might be some of the messages that one ingested as a female born person. So I want you to think about that as part of what this equation might be. If that's not your case, there's other ways in which we tend to get shamed. And I just think that this fourth house, having Aries here, there's a lot of potential for there to be some repressed feelings, for there to be various parts of yourself that you were sort of told are not okay. And so, I know that's taking a little bit of a deep dive, but that's kind of where the fourth house takes us. I mean, I suppose this could be that you have some really aggravating contractors working on your house and you need to make some kind of pivot regarding that. That could absolutely be true too. But so those are kind of the topics. Those are some of the things you want to think about. Um, a couple places Lori and I have been talking about where you can get some more information. Number one is thinking back to 19 years ago, to 2005, when there was a solar eclipse in the exact same place. You may want to think about what was going on in your life in April 2005, if you're old enough for that to be a memory you have. So think about that. That's going to provide clues. Another thought is that 2 weeks ago we had the lunar eclipse in Libra, and that gave you some tips as to where you probably give yourself away, in something to do with your most public part of your life. So your profession, most likely, or something else to do with your social reputation. Where do you give up your power? And that's going to be part of what this picture is, this new cornerstone that you want to put in your foundation, this new courageous, bold, lively direction that you want to take things in, to do with your home life and to do with the very foundation of your personality.
Hmm.
So,
I
yeah.
love that you brought up the contractor. I love you brought up the contractor because yeah, I mean, in the fourth house, it can so it can just show up in such a practical way as our home. And this also could mean this could also suggest a time where you're really considering moving to another home or another part of the country or out of the country. This is you want to think where Aries is right now. What do you want? What do you want your home to look like, to be like? Who do you want included there? How do you want to be and exist within the context of your family? And how has that been over the course of your life? Where have you been, like Jenny said, where have you been shut down for being too loud or too aggressive within the home and family? And how have you paid a price for that? And how can you go in there and really get clear with yourself? Have I hurt family members? We all hurt our family members, but this is a time to really grapple with your own understanding of what your Aries nature is within that home and family space and how you can support the pivot that is occurring at this time that is bringing you forward with a new story of what your home and family can be moving forward.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm just thinking this too could really, I think it is important considering your early home life here, just to think about like there could be some, um, struggles with feeling valued, at this level. And even if you are the person with the annoying contractor and you get really angry about something that's going on, it is still going to be a worthwhile pursuit to dig into where is that anger coming from. It is incredibly disruptive having your house worked on. Let's be real. But also like let it show you the other layers because all of these things are connected. And we really been encouraging people to pay attention to those hot feelings, pay attention to the feelings of anger, frustration, and let them let them help liberate you, by creating a relationship with those pieces, letting those pieces have a voice, and then making your decision with those pieces incorporated about what you wish to do. That's going to be a pivot point here. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's an important one. The fourth house is one of those super important angular houses.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to folks who have Aquarius rising. If you've got Aquarius rising, all of this heat and shifting energies is happening right in your third house. So what is this about? Well, the third house is, I think of it, I think of it as our voice, how we use our voice, where we use our voice. You can think of the third house as communication. In terms of the people that hold space in that third house, it's your siblings, your neighbors. It's also your neighborhood itself. So with Aries here, this is an area where if you've got Aquarius rising, you probably have a lot of heat in this area. You may have, you want to look at how your voice may have been used in a very courageous way throughout your life or in a very aggressive, damaging way, probably some of both. If you've got Aquarius rising, some of both has probably been a part of that. What you want to think about here, one thing you want to think about is what what do you really desire? What do you want to say with your voice? What do you want to bring your neighborhood's attention to, or your siblings or your neighbors themselves? What do you want to bring that really involves facing, bringing your own, yeah, blah, blah, blah. I can't quite get my words right. But there's a courage that it takes to look at your vulnerability here and the fact that you know that you have been damaged in this area as well as you've probably damaged other people. There's wounds in this area that are being highlighted at this time. Growing up as a child in this culture, you probably, if you've got Aquarius rising, you come into the world with a very unique personality. And your voice has probably, as a child, wasn't terribly appreciated. You may have been told an awful lot to quiet down or to, yeah, that's interesting to think about because you may have also negated that area. There's some storyline around how you've used your voice, and you want to really take on an understanding, take on the courage to really dig in there and find what the storyline is, how you use your voice, because this is a period of time where you can really shift that. You can really use your understanding of your vulnerability and the heat with which you need to speak up. So there's something in there that you really need to tweak and change the storyline going forward. You can get a few clues to deepen your understanding here by thinking back to 2005. I know that's difficult if you're 20 or 25 years old, but if you're my age, 2005 seems like it was last weekend. It's very easy to remember that. But if you can think back to 2025, when the eclipse happened right at the same degree, so there was a pivot that was made at that time around how you use your voice. Think about that. Think about how that pivot played out, what decisions you may have made then. Did they work? Do you wish you had done it differently? That can give you some clues of how you want to kind of guide the pivot that you're in the middle of right now. The other thing that will help your understanding is to think about the lunar eclipse that happened 2 weeks ago that occurred in your ninth house. So some way in which a renewed or a new understanding of your own worldview kind of folds into this conversation of how you use your voice.
Mhm.
Bringing those together should help you understand what the shift is, what the change is, in terms of how you use that strong voice.
Mhm. Yeah, I think what comes to mind, you've really covered a lot of the bases there, and that's great. I think what comes to mind when I keep thinking about is just the sibling relationship. Like if you have siblings, what are your sibling relationships like, and what kind of information did those relationships have? Because they're so fundamental. Those sibling relationships are so fundamental to the way we grew up, and having Aries in the third house, it certainly suggests, like you said, heat or a frustration or something, or a need in which you felt the urge to survive, because Aries can be survival.
Mm.
In the context of that. And I mean, the third house refers to our immediate environment because of that early childhood stuff when you're a baby, and you have to, the siblings in your environment are obstacles to your ability to get the attention that you need from your parents. And then they also might become collaborators in getting the attention you need, both need from your parents, or you all need. So there's an interesting, those sibling relationships are fascinating. There's a lot of depth there, and that could be one of the things. I mean, you may not have a sibling, so if that's a different set of things, but that also brings up the idea of, well, Aries being an only child could also be, that could be how that plays out too. But nonetheless, I think there's some great information in there, and also asking the questions about the vulnerability to do with those relationships, because our siblings, they know us in a way that nobody else does, and they see stuff about us that nobody else can. So there's something, and vice versa, so something in that is really fruitful and can help you understand in what way do you want to move forwards, and use your voice for good, to courageously step into that space and not be afraid to say what needs to be said, but also do it in a way that is kind and compassionate. That's a tricky needle to thread, but that's what this pivot's all about. So
That's
yeah.
awesome. That's awesome. Okay, let's move on to folks who have Pisces rising.
Alrighty, so those of you with Pisces rising, interesting. This Aries solar eclipse is landing in your second house. The second house, on a basic level, is the way we value ourselves. It's the way you see what your own worth is, as a Pisces rising person. On bigger levels, it also refers to money. It refers to your possessions. And sometimes those can be quite concrete and tangible things that we're discussing. So in any case, this Aries solar eclipse falls into that area of life. And that means that there's a real possibility for a big pivot to do with this. It'd be really easy just to talk about this as far as money. How can I make more money? Would be a simple thing to think about given the culture most of us live in. That's kind of the go-to. But I think that the deeper question here is really trying to penetrate into what are the deeper questions here. What is the angle? Like, what is your ability to relate to yourself and really value yourself, and value what you have to offer other people, value what resources you have to offer to others, and really kind of reckon with that piece of it. Because with the eclipse here, you really can make a big change. But in order to do that, you are going to have to face whatever the wounding is here. With Chiron in the mix, we just have to look at our vulnerability. We have to look at the places that we feel inadequate, or we feel, unable to ask for support, or we feel really alone, and really don't know how to act on our sense of self. Or when we do act on a sense of self, it's totally overcompensating for a deep-seated fear that you're really not worth anything. So that has to be faced, and that is kind of what this eclipse is asking of all of us, is to face those deeper places so that we can redefine what it means to be courageous, redefine what it means to step forward in a new direction, fully understanding the vulnerability that you're bringing with you. So that's kind of the core topic. It's also interesting to think about, for those of you who are old enough to think about 19 years ago in 2005, what kind of pivot happened then, because we had the same configuration. We had a solar eclipse in Aries in the exact same place. So think about that if that's useful to you. Think about whatever happened in that also gives you context. It lets you see how your life has unfolded over many years. So that's one thing that can help you understand this pivot point. The other one is to think back to the lunar eclipse that was in Libra 2 weeks ago. Now, that eclipse happened in your eighth house, which really revealed the way that you give away yourself to other people in their intense moments or with their own baggage, like letting yourself kind of be either manipulated or set aside your own needs for the needs of others in a way that isn't healthy for you or the other person. So if there is something like that that came about in the last 2 weeks, it's very likely that has to do with one of your intimate partnerships. That is just a typical thing how the eighth house plays out. So think about what has come to light and then let that ask, kind of introduce the question to you of, okay, and what are you worth in the face of that? Like, how do you size up, in the face of other people's stuff? And then go ahead and prioritize what you really want in this area of your life and trust that you're going to be able to do that without being selfish, but rather incorporating the ideas of vulnerability and compassion into that as well. So there's a lot going on here.
There
Yeah.
is. I really like, I really think it's really interesting with this going on in the second house to really give a lot of thought to that connection between money, resources, and self-worth.
Mhm.
What does it mean if suddenly the financial rug gets pulled out under you? Do you completely lose your self-worth? you
Mm.
know you really need to understand how those two work together and how you value yourself, whether or not your bank account is at whatever level you think it ought to be at. But there's a real contemplation in here with Chiron in there to think about how you are vulnerable around money, how money makes your self-worth vulnerable. Um, how maybe, in the course of your life, you've encountered real wounding through not having or having too much and being selfish with it. There's all kinds of conversations that can come out of this. But like Jenny said, bottom line, figure out, what it means to you, what money, resources, self-worth mean to you. Figure out for yourself what that would look like in an ideal world for you, how you want that to develop,
Mhm.
and go in, look really internally, do a deep dive in understanding that, and allow your life to pivot. That pivot could be in the direction of making more money. That pivot could be around suddenly inheriting money. That pivot could be in, wow, I don't need what I thought I needed. And I don't have to continue beating my head against a wall just to make sure I have X amount of money in the bank. So it can play out in many ways, but there's a pivot in there around money and self-worth that you have the opportunity to really work with as we move forward.
Mhm. It's funny when you were talking about that, I was also thinking about the other end of it of somebody who has a massive wealth, an enormous amount of wealth, and yet can't stop themselves from trying to make more money. And why? Because they haven't resolved the self-worth issues. And so, there is a link between the money and the self-worth. But make no mistake that there's no free lunch. There's no like, if you're born into a situation where you have a lot of money, then you're told, oh, look, you've already succeeded because you have money, so you're not worth shit because you don't have to do anything. So you've already succeeded. And where does that leave you if you're someone like that? So, I mean, I think there's something really important about examining the impetus for what you're doing. Or you might say, no, I really want to make a lot of money because I have these very clear goals around what I want to do as a philanthropist. I have very clear ideas about what things I could put that into that really need to happen right now. And that's actually a good example because That's what we're talking about. We're talking about taking determined leadership action, but in a way that isn't just for you, in a way that allows you to see how you fit into the bigger picture and that you do matter. And that's kind of the key phrase of this one. You do matter. And how do you want to work with that? How do you want to make a pivot based on that?
I
So,
just love that you brought the philanthropy conversation because, you know, regardless of how much money you have in the bank, you, yeah, this would be an awesome time to really make a donation somewhere. Give of yourself, you know, really looking at the tendency, on the negative side, the tendency to be selfish where Aries is. Well, that really contributes, that tendency towards selfishness contributes to the woundedness in this house and looking at that. So regardless, you know, you don't have to have a gazillion dollars and give away half of that and be a great philanthropist. You can, you know, have very little and give $20 to the food shelf, whatever it is, to find a way. And, you know, make no mistake, wherever you are on that level, the amount you give is going to uplift your self-worth.
yeah.
Even if nobody else knows you did it, it's going to uplift your self-worth. I think that that second house is just a fascinating house in that consideration of money, resources, and self-worth. It's fascinating.
Yeah, especially as that Pisces rising person who's just, who's in the world to, ideally alleviate suffering, help alleviate suffering of others, to be sensitive to the realities of others, and then that being part of the path. So it is a really interesting to think about the Aries being there. But anyway, yeah,
Great.
great.
I think we've gone through all of them. I think, yay.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I think
Hmm.
we're ready to close this down.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Lori.
All right. Let me
Enjoy the eclipse.
figure out how to turn this off. Okay.